Hey everybody, Jake here with TrendSpider to go over the weekend video update into the second week of May. Today we're going to go over the broad market charts, some crypto, as well as some individual names. But before I jump into that, just wanted to quickly mention that we do have our new relative volume indicator out. This is an indicator that allows you to see unusual volume in the scanner, on the alerts, and actually visually as well. So if you just go to the indicators here and you click these three dots, you'll be able to just type in relative volume. All you have to type in is rela for relative, and relative volume will pop up. Click on it, and then you can change all of these different things here. Click apply, and you'll see here that it pops up. Now, what you have here is you have the baseline. So this is just the average volume. In this case, the SMA, the 20-day average volume here. So that's your baseline. So anytime you have volume above that, you're going to have this green spike. Anytime you have a lower volume day, you're going to have this red shaded area. So definitely a cool tool to use, not only on the visual side, but also in the scanner. Let's say that you wanted to go through this weekend and look for stocks that had 2x the volume, their average volume in the S&P 500. You could just go to 500, that will take you to the S&P index, and then just go to condition, weekly, and you can do indicator, just type in relative volume here, and you'd say is greater than the constant value of 2. That means that you are looking for 2 times the average volume, and you can see here we're looking at the 20-week SMA, which is that's what we're comparing it to. So anything that's twice as big as the 20-week SMA, which is the simple moving average, which is just the average volume for 20 weeks, you'll be able to just type that in, scan, and I actually don't think there were a ton this week. There was a couple, but you can see here that these stocks that pop up will be finding that pretty heavy volume over the last week. So that's something to definitely use in the scanner. As I mentioned, you can also use it in the multi-factor alerts, but definitely just wanted to mention that before we jumped into some charts today. So let's jump into SPY. A really strong week after a kind of a weird start to the week. We broke down through the volume shelf. We continued up. Initially, this volume shelf was a little bit of a supply zone, and then we just blasted off right through it. You can see a nice, healthy balloon raindrop here with a lot of that volume at the top of the range. But on the weekly side of things, you have this interesting trend line here, this diagonal resistance right in line with this 2.618 extension here. So this will be an interesting level to break through. You've got some confluence here. If we do break through both of these levels, that could bring, multiple market participants who are using both fibs and the trend lines into this longer term move if we did break out through that area. QQQ, we've got kind of a similar setup here. The only thing is we did not break through the volume shelf. We actually broke down through it and kind of entered this volume gap. And you can see here that I'm just anchoring the volume by price from the March lows here. And you can see if we do continue up, this supply zone above would be the area to watch to get through. But another thing to note here is we had a gap up on Friday, but we had a red raindrop. So not the strongest move to the upside when you see that second half of the day having its VWAP lower than the first half. You can see buyers definitely not in control into the end of the day. But on top of that, I wanted to point out this fact that we do have 3 red weeks in a row. And if you look back, there's not a ton of times where you have more than 3 red weeks in a row. So since COVID, we've had 2 red weeks in a row. We've had some down here as well. I'll highlight those as well. But we haven't really had more than 3. So, we had 3 back in September. We had 3 back in late February. We have 3 again. If you look back into 2018, we did have 4 red weeks in a row. So just keep that in mind. Generally, after about 4 red weeks in a row, you most of the time have some type of bounce there. So not only do we have that, we also have the upper Bollinger Band still pretty far above. So if we look at the Bollinger Band here on the monthly side of things, using multi-timeframe analysis, that is around 360 at this point. So if we did continue up, that 360 would be the top of the upper monthly Bollinger Band here. So something to keep in mind. You can see here that I do have an alert set on that upper Bollinger Band. So moving on to IWM. IWM is an interesting one because we are still stuck in this supply zone. So if I turn off MTFA and I turn on the volume by price on the weekly chart, you'll see here that this area from these COVID lows, we are just really having trouble getting through this area for 6 weeks now or more, 7 weeks. So this zone could really turn into a launch pad for price if we can finally break through it. You can see here that we closed right at it. And you can also see here what I did was I anchored the VWAP from the March lows, and you can see how well the price has respected this area. I did create an offset here, so notice every time that we have pulled back, we did break down through this original anchored VWAP, but we generally stay, I forgot what exactly the offset was, 2% around that area. So notice that this band is a 2% band to the downside. So that captures some of that margin of error around this area. You can see here that we did have a nice breakout off this volume shelf. So could be a pretty strong week for IWM and small caps into the week ahead. Moving on to DIA, Dow Jones Industrial ETF, just an absolute huge move up the last week. And you can see here that if we anchor from the March lows using the volume by price, this area did act as a nice launch pad. One thing that I'll mention here is you can see that we did have this breakout here with volume at the top of the range above this breakout zone. And so if you look at the hollow candle, though, you'll see that the wick, all of that volume is actually in this wick. So that's what I'd like to look for. Anytime that you have volume within the wick above a breakout zone, that's a pretty strong indication that there's conviction by buyers. And really, you could see that on the weekly chart as well. Just a huge move up for this week. And into next week, I mean, we're kind of clearing or going into clear skies above. Not a lot of resistance overhead as we continue to hit all-time highs, and you can see how well this trend line has been acting as resistance over the last few months, and now just support over the last 5 weeks. So we'll see if this continues up into the week ahead. Moving on to GDX, looking at the gold ETF here, you can see here that this is a pretty cool case study using the volume by price here. So anytime that you have kind of this area where you have two volume shelves, you can see how quickly price can move through this orange area. That's what I call the volume gap, just an area where there's not a lot of liquidity. You can see here that for about 3 days we had trouble breaking through this supply zone above, but once we did, we really started to move. So just think about that, for IWM, we've kind of got that same setup on the longer term weekly chart. So if we do break through, it could go pretty quick. On the longer term side of things, we are breaking out here on the weekly after retesting this resistance and starting to turn back to the upside. So if we did look for possibly, an area to break through, it would be this anchored VWAP here, which we did touch last week. So breaking through that area would definitely be something to consider. If we do continue up, we really need to close through that zone on strong volume. Now moving on to the VIX. The VIX is an interesting one here because there's a pretty cool pattern that I found here on the monthly side of things. So if we compare the 2008 highs to the 2020 highs, you'll see here that we do have a pretty strong meltdown of the VIX, both in 2008, 2009, and then 2020 into 2021. And so this area was an area where the VIX did bounce back in 2008. So we'll have to see if that's the case here going into the rest of the summer. And the main thing that's really interesting about this is if you go to the seasonality, you'll see here over the last 5 years, April and May have very weak seasonality for VIX. That means only 20% of the time in April and May, the VIX has closed green versus the previous months. So pretty much 2 months in a row, it's a very weak time of the year. But you'll see here in June, VIX has an 80% win rate. So you have this spike in seasonality here with June being a pretty solid month for the VIX closing green. So not only do you have this move down to this level again, but you also have going into June a pretty strong win rate there. So something to consider going into the month of June and into the rest of May. Now moving on to Bitcoin and some of these crypto names, Bitcoin is definitely trying to get through this 3.618 extension on the monthly. But if we go to the daily chart, you'll see here that we are still trying to get through this this break-even supply zone. So if we anchor from the January lows here, this pivot before we hit new highs, you'll see that we are starting to poke our head above this area that has been acting as resistance. So you can see that we are finally starting to break through. We did get above 59K today, so that's something to consider. I made this video on Saturday, so that's when we're breaking through 59K. If you're watching this a couple days, who knows where Bitcoin will be. But the main thing here is on the weekly side of things, we are starting to possibly break through this ascending triangle here that's forming. And you can see here, this is the 5.618 on the weekly chart. So really these 0.618 extensions act as a very strong level for a lot of crypto names. So Bitcoin, Ethereum is the same one. I mean, Ethereum is just taking off right now. And if it does continue up, the next area to watch would be this 3.618 extension above on the weekly chart, and that's right around 4,900. Psychological levels around 5,000. So definitely would be possibly a magnet to the upside. And notice here, since 2016, June is not the strongest month for crypto. So that doesn't mean that since we're in a pretty strong crypto bull market here. But June is historically not the strongest month of the year. So keep that in mind going back about 5 years here, that is something to think about. Now we have broken through this medium term, shorter term resistance here. So that's probably bringing in some new buyers that are buying this breakout. So all in all, just very strong on the Ethereum side of things. Dogecoin is the next one. Dogecoin is one that really respected some pretty important fibs as well. So if we look at the anchored VWAPs from the turned off the wrong thing. From the high here back in April, and then the low back in on April 22nd, you'll see this is the measured move, and you can see that it's really respecting this 0.618 extension pretty well. And you'll see here that if we did move down, these anchored VWAPs from these two swing points would be around 44. But remember, as the price, if it moves up, these anchored VWAPs are going to move up as well, because it takes into account this new price action with volume. So we'll see if we do break down this area around, let's say 44 to 41 or so. Now remember, this thing does capitulate pretty fast. So if we did break down through this area, it wouldn't be a huge shock. Now on the longer term side of things, we are still in this breakout mode. We broke out of this in mid-April, and then we're holding this longer-term resistance, which acted as support, and then we bounced off of it. So we'll see if that actually continues to play out, but definitely something to consider. That I think a lot of people are looking at this Elon Musk Saturday Night Live event to possibly push Doge. Whatever the thesis is there, we are at the 1.618 extension, and that's really what's making the market at this time. So moving on to PLTR, some individual names. You can see PLTR here is just absolutely melting. I mean, we now have 7 red candles in a row. That is just absolutely brutal. We are still in kind of this coiling action within this falling wedge here. Have an alert on both the resistance and support. So now I don't have to be alerted, I don't have to, go to the chart and see, did this break out? Did it break down? I set the alerts, and then whenever the 10-minute candle breaks down or touches either one of these trend lines into next week, I'll be alerted. So that is the daily side of things. The weekly side of things, you can see we're breaking down through this bearish pennant here. So definitely not the strongest look here for PLTR, at least for now. But it is crazy that we've had, actually, if you look, it's actually been 9 red days in a row here. Just pretty impressive, honestly. Twitter is the next one that we'll take a look at. And Twitter is one that really respected the volume shelf nicely after this earnings gap down. So if we anchor the volume by price from the January lows, you'll see here that we literally gapped down right to this next volume shelf, and you can see that we gapped down right through the volume gap. So that's just really how well price respects these areas. And so if we did start to move up, we don't have a lot of liquidity above, so the price could move very quickly through this area, and something to consider on the long side. Now on the weekly side of things, you can see that we did kind of undercut this symmetrical triangle support. Not a ton of data points here. It's only the original data point, and we're connecting it and extending it, but we did close above it. So I'm going to count that as a little undercut, but still the trend line is intact. And if we moved up, that would be a pretty strong move up to around 67, 65 area. Remember, if you're using diagonal trend lines, you can't have a set area above. This is descending over time. So if it went straight up next week, your resistance would be around 69. If it took, let's say, into mid-June, your resistance is going to be around 65. So just keep that in mind when you are using diagonal trend lines and those types of levels. Now into SQ. SQ is definitely an interesting one as well. On the trend line side of things. So what I did, and I'll just replicate this again. Let me turn off the volume by price. And you'll see here, if I turn on the auto trends, I did this yesterday, and something really interesting came up. Notice how long this support line has been in play. So since starting in the COVID lows in March of 2020, you can see this area has acted as support multiple times. So if I want to keep this this line on the chart and get rid of all the other lines, just double click here. Maybe I want to keep this resistance as well, or maybe I want to keep this for maybe a symmetrical triangle setup here. Just double click, turn off trends, and we have a clean chart. So this is something you should definitely check out on TrendSpider. The auto trends can really be an idea generator rather than doing all the work for you. So this is kind of the setup we're in right now. Now, if you did want to just change this, hold down the shift key, click this, it will be deleted. Turn on trends again, just double click this, turn off trends, double click that, make it red, and we have the same chart that I just pulled up. So definitely something to keep in mind, that we are starting to get pretty close to this symmetrical triangle apex, and we're going to have to either make or break here to the upside or the downside. This is a great area to just put an alert and not have to guess where it's going. Just whenever the alert goes off on the resistance or support, you know that's where price action has made its move. Now on the weekly side of things, we do have 4 red weeks in a row here as well. Notice that we generally do not have that many in a row. So we had 3 here back in October. We had 3 here back in January. We had 3 red weeks in a row back during the COVID, just absolute waterfall here. So 4 red weeks in a row is definitely not that common. So definitely something to keep in mind on just the the long side of things, that this thing can, if you look back, go down more than 4 weeks in a row, but it's very uncommon to get that many weeks red in a row. Now on the seasonality side of things, if we are looking back pretty much since this IPO'd in 2015, you'll see that June and July ramp up pretty strong for seasonality. So for June, 80% win rate. July, a 100% win rate. So that means over the last 6 years, every July has closed green. If we're looking back 5 years, since January 2016, same thing. So definitely some strong seasonality going into these summer months. Now, moving on to Tesla. Tesla is one that has really had some trouble holding this volume shelf here, using the anchored volume by price from this low here. You'll see that we're barely hanging on at this point. Now, if you look at the weekly side of things, we are getting pretty close to this symmetrical triangle, the apex here, and the apex is just pretty much the end of the pattern here. So what's interesting here is May only has a 40% win rate. So we're kind of right in line with that right now. If we look at the monthly chart, you can definitely see it's a red month so far. We still have plenty of time left in the month, but you'll see here that we are getting close to the symmetrical triangle apex. And notice here that June does have a pop in win rate here over the last 5 years with an 80% win rate. And so that's something to also consider when we are getting pretty close to the apex here. And honestly, right at the end of this pattern is when we go into the month of June. So that will be interesting to see if we do break out. If we break down, we would definitely have to look below, maybe at this anchored VWAP from the start of this area around, let's say, 590 or so. So just remember, anchored VWAPs are great to use if you are watching trend lines break down and watching for the next level below. So that is Tesla. Moving on to the last one, Roku. Roku is a very interesting one for a couple reasons. One, what an absolute just huge move last week to the downside before a little bit of a bounce there into the end of the week with earnings. But another one is just the fact that since this IPO'd, June, July, and August all have 100% win rates. So that is pretty impressive. Over the last 4 years, all of these months have been green every single time. So that doesn't mean that it's going to definitely be a green month this June, July, and August, but just keep in mind that historically speaking, these have been very strong months. So as I mentioned, the win rate simply means 100% of the time June has closed higher than May's monthly close. So that's how you can interpret that data. And you can also go in and you can say, all right, well, what's the min max? And you can see if we make this a little bigger, you'll see this little cloud here, this blue cloud will show you, is this particular month very volatile. So you can see here for November, you can see how wide this cloud is. And that shows that there's very big moves to the upside, but also big moves to the downside. So using the min max and then the raw data here, you'll see here on November, within one November, over the last 3 Novembers, Roku was up 115% one November. Now it was also down 26%. So you can use this raw data and this cloud to get an idea of not only the win rate of the month, but also just in general how the volatility of each month stands using this raw data in this min-max cloud here. So a lot of cool stuff that you can try on TrendSpider. Remember to definitely check out the relative volume indicator. There's a lot of different ways that you can use it on the platform. And if you guys have any questions as always, just let us know. You can comment below or send us a message at TrendSpider on Twitter. Yeah, if you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe. We'll be starting up the Stock Trading Pit Season 4 coming in the next week or so, week or 2 weeks. But either way, it's coming very soon. So once those do premiere and you're subscribed to TrendSpider, you will get the alert once those go live. So definitely subscribe. If you enjoy the videos, please give us a like. And really appreciate your time checking out this video. Hopefully it was helpful. And remember, we do have a 7-day free trial if you want to try any of these different features out that I touched on today. Everybody have a great weekend, and thanks for watching.